This is an exercise in making poetry out of your memories. Everyone has material for poetry because everyone has memories from childhood, from yesterday. It doesn't matter. As long as you have a memory, you can make a poem. Right? But to be a poem, you have to render your memories into a form that make them immediate, vivid, compelling, and artful. And the key to starting this process is focus. You can't make a good poem out of an entire era of your life. A lot of people have the urge to write about back then, or the good old days, or those times when, but that's too vague. If you want to convey your reader into the experience, you have to offer a concrete and specific experience for your reader. The way to make the experience real for the reader is to make it particular. Right? So for instance, a lot of people want to write about childhood, but you can't just write about childhood without getting a lot of sentimental generalities. Consider instead the way this great poet Jane Kenyon writes about childhood in her beautiful poem, My Mother. My Mother by Jane Kenyon. My mother comes back from a trip downtown to the dime store. She has brought me a surprise. It is still in her purse. She is wearing her red shoes with straps across the instep. They fasten with small white buttons like the eyes of fish. She brings back zippers and spools of thread, yellow and green, for her work, which always takes her far away, even though she works upstairs in the room next to mine. She is wearing her blue plaid full-skirted dress with the large collar, her hair fastened up off her neck. She looks pretty. She always dresses up when she goes downtown. Now she opens her straw purse, which looks like a small suitcase. She hands me the new toy, a wooden paddle with a red rubber ball attached to it by an elastic string. Sometimes, when she goes downtown, I think she will not come back. Notice how Kenyon focuses the poem. She uses details, the dress, the bag, the little ball and paddle toy. All of these offer a kind of particular experience that's much more meaningful than the generalities of childhood. The details, in fact, add up to something much bigger than themselves. So the key to writing about your memories is particularity. And the starting place for particularity is, in fact, place. So in this exercise, I want you to begin by thinking of the memory you want to write about, and then thinking as immediately as possible of the place most associated with that memory. Where are you in this memory? I want you to take a piece of paper and write that place down on the piece of paper. And then underneath that on the paper, I want you to write 4 or 5 particular things that are there. Not abstractions, but things. So if your place is a filling station, you might mention the gas pumps, the Coke machine, right? Just list 4 or 5 or even 6 particular concrete objects that are in that place. Okay? Go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, now I want you to, underneath each of those things you've listed, write a short paragraph form description. Don't try to put it into poetry yet, but underneath it name all the concrete details about these things that you can. Don't use any abstractions. Don't say that you love them. Don't say that they are precious. Don't say that they are awful or that they are good. Just describe them in terms of the five senses. How do these things look? How do they feel? How do they taste? How do they smell? How do they sound? Be as particular as possible and take about 10 or 15 minutes and just write out in paragraph form a description of each object. Okay? Now you have the basic seeds of a poem. You have the concrete details that will make up the poem. But you need to form connections between those details. This is what I like to think of as the connective tissue of the poem, the thing that holds together the concrete details. So let's look, for instance, at this poem by Gerald Stern called The Dancing. And in this poem, he talks about a Philco, which is a kind of automatic record player that was popular in an earlier time. The Dancing. In all these rotten shops, and all this broken furniture, and wrinkled ties, and baseball trophies, and coffee pots, I have never seen a post-war Philco with the automatic eye, nor heard Ravel's Bolero the way I did in 1945 in that tiny living room on Beechwood Boulevard, nor danced as I did then, my knives all flashing, my hair all streaming, my mother red with laughter, my father cupping his left hand under his armpit, doing the dance of old Ukraine, the sound of his skin half drum, half fart, the world at last a meadow. The three of us whirling and singing, the three of us screaming and falling as if we were dying, as if we could never stop. In 1945, in Pittsburgh, beautiful, filthy Pittsburgh, home of the evil melons, 5,000 miles away from the other dancing in Poland and Germany. O God of mercy, O wild God. So notice how we have the important objects and details here, the record players, the trophies, the ties, but we also have the narrative that brings it all together. So the next step in this exercise is to select 3 of the details from your list and to spend some time linking them lightly together with the personal connective tissue. Right? What was happening in your life at the time? At this point, you can start arranging it into lines. Start thinking in terms of a kind of poetic arrangement. So go ahead and pause the video. I'll wait while you do that. Okay, so now you have the rough draft of a poem. You have the beginnings of a concrete and particular poem. The next step you want to take is to give that poem some larger way of connecting with the outside world. You want to put in other words, something that connects your memory to the larger world around it. For instance, consider this poem by Matthew Zapruder called Poem for Jim Zorn. In the photograph, you are holding a green helmet and smiling directly into the future. But the straight and the square rarely advance. A Chinese poet working a minor bureaucratic post a few miles north of the capital wrote 1,200 years ago when they called the emperor the immortal. I know you tried, but a falseness runs through all our dealings. A seahawk is not even a real bird. And somewhere it is still 1976, and I have just lofted a football over the head of my very cold brother, who turns in his blue down coat that used to belong to me, and runs with his arms stretched out as far as he can towards the pine trees, and I fear when he comes back, he will tell me something everyone knows. So in this poem, Zapruder has taken Jim Zorn, a former Seattle Seahawk player and I think later coach, and woven that into the personal story about the confusion and anxiety of youth. He's also woven in this bit about the straight and the square rarely advancing. You're taking some little detail. So think what was going on at the time you're writing. What was happening in the world? Right? If your memory takes place roughly at the time President Kennedy was assassinated, you might mention that. Right? Or if the moon landing is happening, or if the Berlin Wall is coming down. Just see if you can work a line here, maybe a line there, into the poem mentioning that. And that provides a kind of connection to the outside world for your personal memory poem. So go ahead and do that, I'll wait. Okay, so having connected your poem to the world, having grounded it in your particular experience with concrete objects in the world, you have a great first draft of a poem. All you need to do now is work on polishing the craft, work on metaphor, work on sound, work on line, all of these things that make a great poem great. But you have a really good rough draft to work with on that.